do this again at the appropriate time in the agenda. Okay, so we've had a pre-discussion.
That was 4:30, right?
Yeah, 4:30 on the 30th.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, we'll do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because I'm not taking minutes until you start recording.
Got it.
Okay, so let's start recording and open the meeting because we have a quorum. You good, Tucker?
Good.
As a preliminary matter, this is Brian Sullivan, Chair of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Call your name. Please respond in the affirmative. Brooke Moore,
Yes, I'm here.
Penny Dye,
Present.
Christy Ferrantella,
Here.
Dave Iverson,
Here.
Allison Mitchell.
Here.
I don't see Rima at the moment. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Tucker Holland,
Here.
Ken Bogran,
Here.
Eleanor Antonetti.
Here,
Anticipator speakers, we have Jen Goldson,
Sorry, here.
Judy Barrett,
Here.
Barry Frankton,
Here.
Tyler Marin.
Here.
Great. There's one person on that I don't know who it is. You have initials JAV. Can you please put your full name?
That may be me. I'm logging in from an email address that's other than the one I usually use.
Oh, okay.
Yes, my name is Jerome Vigil.
Oh, it's not me. Okay.
Great. Jerome, would you please put your full name into,
How do I do that?
if you right click on, let's see, there are 3 dots when you look at your top right corner of your screen.
Brian, I can do it for him.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, moving on. This is a open meeting of the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust, and it's being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement for the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meetings, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. For this meeting, the Nantucket Affordable Housing Trust is convening by video conference via the Zoom app posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members at this time of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I, the chair, notes otherwise. We're turning to the first item on the agenda for this meeting. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members and registered participants, inviting each by name to provide any comment or questions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or your computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so with the chair, taking care to identify yourself. After the panelists or members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged to speak by and through the chair. With that, we'll move to the second item on the agenda. We are now convened in open session. I'll look for an approval of a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a second from Dave. By roll call, Brooke Moore,
Aye.
Dave Iverson,
Aye.
Allison Mitchell,
Aye.
Penny Dye.
Aye.
Rima Sherry has now joined us. Rima Sherry
Aye.
and Christy Ferrantella.
Aye.
And finally, Brian Sullivan. Aye. The third item on the agenda, the housing production plan update with Judy and Jen. I will turn it over to the two of you to flow freely as you kind of want to bounce the meeting from here.
Sure. Well, thank you. So we have a lot to cover, and Jen and I were talking a little bit before this meeting, and we're kind of thinking that we may need to meet with you one more time before the second webinar, but we'll see how far we get today. And then moving that webinar a week may actually help us in terms of the scheduling with another appointment with you folks. So thanks very much. First of all, I'd like to confirm who received the packet that we sent out on Friday morning. Because on Saturday, I started getting delayed delivery messages from town hall email addresses. And I'm not sure who actually received the email, but on Friday morning around 10:45, I sent out an email with a couple of attachments, one being a draft of the housing needs assessment portion of the housing production plan. There was also a compressed file attached to that email with all of the survey results from the English, Spanish, and Portuguese surveys, and the comments also translated. And the third item was what we call a comments resolution matrix, which is the structure we need you to use to give us comments on the housing needs assessment. So if you have questions about how that works, I think it's self-explanatory, but we're happy to, to discuss it more. But it's just a good structure for us to get comments in a consistent way. And then we're able to feed that back to you. Pardon me? Oh, I thought somebody said
I
something.
did get it. I did
Ken-
get it. So Ken, you probably do have it if I got it. She sent it Friday morning at 10:46. I don't know when I got it, but
Yeah, so Judy and Jen, I think you're aware that the town email was down from late Thursday until like sort of midday yesterday. So I think it did eventually come through at some point yesterday, but the members may not have seen it yet.
Okay. So just so you know, it's coming. There's a draft of the housing needs assessment. We're going to be eager to get any comments from you on that. As I started to say, please use the comments resolution matrix that's attached to that email to provide your comments. It's a very good way for us to get the comments in a consistent way. It also allows us to get back to you and say, here's what we did with your comment. So, so that will be very helpful to us. And I think in the interest of allowing us to keep going forward, the sooner you have a chance to get some feedback back to us on that, the better it will be. It's not an elaborately formatted document. We didn't want to spend a lot of time on that because we know there are going to be changes to it, but that would be really helpful. Penny, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Could you please send it again? I didn't receive it.
I just sent
I
it.
will.
I just sent
Okay.
it, Penny.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Let me make sure it went.
Thanks.
So so that's that. I think that what we wanted to accomplish today and in a subsequent meeting was kind of twofold. We have the second webinar coming up, which I'm going to let Jen talk about. I don't want to steal her thunder or somehow, create confusion. So we'll get to that. But as part of that, we want to be able to be thinking about strategies for implementing the plan. And as you may recall, those of you who were involved in the previous plan, that's really sort of where the rubber meets the road. It's the we've said here are our needs, and these are the things we kind of care about, and how are we actually going to address them? So we've been working on kind of almost an incremental approach to this, in that we had a discussion with Andrew, then we had a discussion with Andrew and Tucker, and we want to have a discussion with you and kind of put up on a screen share. Here are the 5 things DHCD requires the island to address. These are like 5 kinds of actions, and let's have a conversation about them. At least one of them, actually 2 of them, are pretty site specific, and Barry has done a lovely map of kind of possibilities that have been discussed so far at the staff level. And at some point in this meeting, we're going to bring that map up. But we'll get to it. I think that there are some other things that we don't necessarily need the map up for that we'd like to just get your thoughts on. So by the time we go into that webinar, we'll have the benefit of the input from the planning department, from Tucker, and from you folks, and our own, professional opinion, and be able to kind of ask the public for, their thoughts and perhaps even some feedback on those action strategies. So I realize we're kind of jumping from the needs assessment that you haven't really had a chance to read yet to the strategies, but we're trying to keep this moving and meet your deadline. So, and I have a feeling that actually most of you are probably not going to see anything in the needs assessment that surprises you. So I think we actually can have a conversation, at least a beginning one, about the action strategies. The other thing I want to mention is that in the draft needs assessment, you'll find an appendix, which I think Jen may want to talk about today, and I don't want to again steal your thunder on that. But she did a lovely summary of the focus groups and the survey. And so in the housing production plan, there's a summary, and then you have all the data, in that separate compressed file that I mentioned. So I think we would like to kind of give you some feedback on what we learned from this, correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, from the webinar, the first webinar, the focus groups, the survey. And then I'd like to bring up and screen share these sort of DHCD requirements, these sort of 5 kinds of actions that we can discuss. And the final piece of that would be kind of looking at some specific sites on this map that Barry has created. So if that works for you guys, I think that's maybe kind of the order we'd like to go in. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, and Judy, what I'd like to do is have Barry share his screen because he has I'd like to just run through some of the high level findings of mostly the survey and the focus group, focus on those.
That's fine.
But of course, when you have time to read the details, one thing we like to understand from our client committee is, do you think we've interpreted what people are telling us in a way that's fair? And so there's always a risk when you do a summary that you lose some things and you make some assumptions about what people mean, or what are the most important things. And we certainly don't want to put any kind of spin on that we didn't intend to do. So so Barry will go through some of the summary findings, but I'd still love for you, when you get a chance, to really dig into the materials that Judy sent, to really look at not just our summary, but all the details on what we heard from people, and just give us some feedback. If you would summarize things in a different way, we're definitely open to suggestions. Right. So Barry, do you have I think you have the ability to screen share already.
Yep, looks like I got it here.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll go ahead and just discuss a few of the key findings from the focus groups first. Overall, broadly, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Barry, before you get too far, there's a couple people who haven't muted. I think Ken and Dave, if you guys could.
All right. So a couple quick facts. The focus groups were held between February 9th and February 18th. A total of 37 community members participated. It included long-term residents, essential workers, representatives of various community groups, and others that have been struggling to find stable and affordable housing. Some of the key findings, really, there was broad recognition that there is a shortage, there's difficulty accessing housing, there's difficulty affording housing, and also that these issues are trickling into the workforce, where it's really difficult to find essential workers for the fire department, hospital, local schools. Moderate income workers are kind of stuck in this limbo state where they're making a little bit too much to qualify for affordable, but they're not really able to afford rent or a down payment for their own home. Short-term rental housing was one of the really big topics that came up consistently, and really talked a lot about how off-island investors are buying up properties. And there's also properties that are sitting vacant for much of the year when they're not being used for vacation homes. Also just issues sort of covering the spectrum from people early in life to people who are preparing to retire, looking to downsize, and really not finding any options that they'd be able to afford at that point in their life. Also looking at people sort of raised the issue that they'd like to understand some of the topics better. They felt like they weren't sort of clear about what was required under 40B, what types of housing does or does not count towards the subsidized housing inventory. For example, some were really surprised to learn that the covenant homes did not count because of that higher income threshold. Also, there were some comments about improving outreach in multiple languages on what programs are already available for housing assistance, especially in Spanish and Portuguese. Also, just some general comments about the idea of exploring approaches used in other similar communities like Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, where they're looking at similar issues related to vacation homes and difficulty finding housing. A lot of people valued the island's rural character, the open space preservation, and concerns about housing developments impacting the look and feel of the community, adding to traffic, straining infrastructure and services, and so on. Also, just pointing out that there will need to be a range of solutions to address the different needs. There's a limited supply of land, there's high local construction costs, there may be some regulations that could be revisited. And then finally, there were several different innovative housing options that were highlighted, like tiny homes, bringing in modular homes to reduce some of those construction costs, relocating existing structures, and finding new income sources such as taxes on short-term rentals or real estate transfer fees. So that's all covered for now related to the focus groups, but if you have questions on that before I jump to the survey summary, I'm happy to try to answer those. Okay.
I think Tucker has a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. So Barry, do you, with the comments, I guess I'm looking at around like adding to traffic and putting a strain, like it seems to imply like more people coming versus serving folks who are already here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some feedback related to sort of the increase in these larger homes and more properties being converted to vacation homes, that was sort of drawing in more workers that were going to be continuing to put pressure and add to the traffic. There were some questions about parking requirements too, and the fact that because there are multiple families living in single units, that was also adding to the parking and sort of trickling out onto the streets near these larger developments.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let me scan down here. Okay, and here's the survey summary. So a quick background on the total stats. We had 1,173 responses in English, 93 in Spanish, and 38 in Portuguese. So over 1,300 total, which is a great result. About 80% of those were year-round residents, 14% were part-time residents. And I'll just go into some of the key findings here. In general, people felt renters face greater housing insecurity than homeowners. More than half of the responses were from people who rent, or more than half of the responses from people who rent indicated that they've struggled to pay rent and other housing costs at least a few months in the past year. We don't know how much of that may be due to COVID, but that's the response we received. And about 2/3 of owners have never struggled with these costs in the past year. There was a focus on the urgent need for housing for the town's workforce, including essential workers. Several pointed out that even though there are higher wages for these positions, this results in them not qualifying for low-income housing, and there's fewer middle-income options outside of the covenant program. And also the shortage of housing options was linked to high rents and vacant properties due to the seasonal housing market. People highlighted the need for housing to accommodate families without being overcrowded or in unsafe conditions, as well as options for seniors to downsize. And then among the Spanish and Portuguese residents specifically, the primary concerns were high costs, small size of their home, lack of outdoor space, and the need for repairs. There are also some concerns about overdevelopment related to natural resource protection, capacity of infrastructure, and also the focus on Mid-Island for a lot of the more recent development. People felt like it should be dispersed a little bit more on other parts of the island. Some of the solutions that were brought up: restrictions on short-term rentals, working more with employers to provide housing for staff, expanding rental and down payment assistance programs, and amendments to zoning ordinances to accommodate more density and require affordability. And then there was a mix of feedback on the land bank and real estate transaction fees. Some were really grateful for all the conservation that's been possible because of those fees that are collected. Others felt like the volume of land protection was really reducing available land for new homes. And then others thought there could be an opportunity to divert a portion of the revenue to establish a similar program to collect real estate, or establish a similar program to collect real estate fees. And I can show you a couple of the graphs real quick, just on how long people have lived on the island. About a quarter have been there 30 or more years. And this includes all responses from English, Spanish, and Portuguese. The household size, about a third were 4 or more, meaning the respondent to the survey lived with 3 or more other people, and another third were 2-person households, fewer in 1 or 3 people households. And you can see where people were coming from. So the majority of responses were from Mid-Island, quite a few from Nantucket in the town, and then the Old South Road area was next. And then not too many on these others down at the bottom: Sconset, Madaket, Pulpus, etc. I think that's about it for a summary, but if you have other questions, I'm happy to dig deeper into any of those.
And I know, you know, we want to spend most of our time talking about the strategies with you. I don't want to cut you short if you do have questions, but I think we could probably move on, Judy, to focusing on the strategies. I don't see anybody's hands up. Oh, Brooke.
Yeah. No surprises here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just hand it back to you, Judy and Tyler.
So there's a question in the chat about whether the documents can be shared with them. And my only comment is, I mean, everything's a public document once we give it to the committee anyway. So it's entirely up to you. But I think at this point, the comments that we're going to be paying the most attention to on the needs assessment will be from the committee. How you choose to then, you know, share the documents, I think is entirely up to you and your own protocol, but it was intended for committee review. So I'm now,
Penny,
Penny, did you have a
one-
question?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I would like the opportunity to review and give feedback before this is made public.
That's up to the committee.
Okay.
You're on, Brian, are you talking?
Brooke has a comment.
I concur as well. To publish an unfinished product, I think leads to confusion in the community about what we're actually saying.
Great. I'll say thanks for that input. Let's get through all of the presentation. If there's any, you know, kind of revisit, then we can make a decision at that
Sure.
point.
So we're going to do another screen share now. We're actually going to bring up just a straight Word document that has those DHCD strategies, so we can have a conversation about them and literally add text to it as we go along. Tyler, do you want to bring this up?
Yeah, no problem. Hello, everybody.
You'll see some italicized notes where it kind of shows what we've already talked about with
Everyone's gonna
Andrew.
let me make it bigger.
Yeah.
Full screen, and then
Yeah.
is that
Yeah, that I
good?
I
Okay.
think it's pretty readable. So,
Okay.
so a couple of these you're going to want to see a map. And I said to Jen before this meeting, I want to hold off on the map because once we get into the map, it's a lot of fun. And then we don't get to the other things in the list that aren't necessarily map specific, but we'll get there. DHCD has these several requirements that somehow we need to hit. And they are, you have to identify zoning districts or areas in the community where you will propose to modify regulations, existing regulations, to create SHI eligible developments. So let's just be clear what that means. That means housing that is affordable to people with incomes at or below 80% of the median. That doesn't mean that the district can't also provide for some higher incomes, but to be SHI eligible, there has to be at least 25% of the units in the development being, you know, an SHI eligible, or the units have to be in any case. So you may not want to qualify an entire project, but the units that count will be 80% or below in terms of the income limit. So that's one of the standards, and we'll come back to this in a minute. The second one is identifying specific sites where you will encourage the filing of comprehensive permits. And that's where the map will come back. And Barry's got this great map, but we'll hold on that for now. The third one is characteristics of proposed housing or mixed use developments that you would prefer to see, whether it's in a zoning supported district or a comprehensive permit. And the state kind of just lists these ideas like infill development or cluster or adaptive reuse and so forth. So we need to get some feedback from you on that, so we're not the ones making it up. The fourth one is identifying municipally owned parcels where you would commit to issuing an RFP to develop SHI eligible housing. So once again, that's housing principally for people with incomes at or below 80% of the median. And the map is going to be helpful for that as well. And some of the sites we talked about for the second criterion end up kind of falling under that fourth one as well. And then the last one, which is always kind of a weird fit for Nantucket, is participating in regional collaborations to address housing development. We'll have to come up with some creative ideas about that. I think in the last plan, we might have talked about, you know, sharing information or partnerships with the Vineyard or something, but it was, you know, it's kind of a difficult one to answer. But I think, you know, with that, maybe we can just go back up here to the top of this to the identification of areas or districts where you, meaning the town, would propose to change your regulations to create SHI eligible housing. So between Tucker and Andrew, these were things that were suggested that you can see on the screen. Workforce housing, parentheses, home ownership, currently allowed in R5, could be expanded to R10, 20, or 40. Expanding mixed use in the commercial districts like CDT. Focus more on the 80% standard, which is what we have to do if you're going to call it SHI eligible. Perhaps reduce parking requirements. It's one of the most common impediments to developing multifamily housing is the amount of parking that's required, which I realize may be counter to what you heard from people in the webinars or in the survey about we don't require enough parking. But as planners, we're just saying, but that becomes an impediment to developing housing when the requirements for parking are really high. Allowing ADUs to be larger, maybe with the benefit of a special permit. I would simply point out that for ADUs to count as SHI eligible is extremely difficult. So it's a great thing to talk about in terms of more housing supply. It doesn't necessarily get you to SHI eligibility. Apartment buildings with more bedrooms should be allowed and maybe move away from the special permit process. And then this other thing that we talked about, especially yesterday, was, you know, your town has this this longstanding planning framework of town and county overlays. So in the town overlay, you allow more to happen, and in the country overlay, it's a more, you know, less developed part of town. So those are not necessarily places where you may want to encourage more types of housing and frankly more density. But then what strategies do work in those areas if it's not going to be regulatory? So it's something I think we need some input from you guys on. And then finally, expanding the CN district within the town overlay was something that came up. So we'd just like to get some feedback from you guys on these ideas and perhaps add to this if you have others that have not come up so far. Brooke, yeah?
So could you please, for myself and whoever's listening, tell me what CDT stands for?
Oh, Lord. Tucker, can you help us? Because I don't remember. You guys have a zillion districts.
Commercial downtown.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a couple of commercial zoning districts worth adding into that. I would probably say, it would have to look at the maps, but I would say all of the commercial districts, because we now have 5, I think.
I know.
CI, which is commercial industrial,
Right.
CN, commercial neighborhood, and then
LC.
Yeah. LC, which they're kind of taking away.
No, LC's gone. It's been gone for years.
Yeah.
No, we have CDT, CI, CMI, CN, CTEC.
Yeah, CTEC's the other one. Yep.
Okay. So you're thinking maybe all the commercial districts ought to be up for discussion?
I think they all need to be reviewed and up for discussion because some of them only allow accessory uses to the existing businesses.
Yeah,
And I think the majority do. And so I think that opening up that opportunity for affordable units accessory to the business would at greater
Okay.
density might be helpful.
I mean, I think CI should be out of that equation, to be honest with you.
Why is that?
That's the commercial industrial. And I mean, we're hard up enough for that zoning district. To clog it up with housing would be, I think, foolish. And plus, it's not the kind of place you want people living. I mean, it's basically Coffin's Pit at the airport, you know?
It's not the ultimate place to be creating units in general.
Exactly.
We don't have any, current. I don't know if the flex development code should be a discussion or looked at in the sense of there are requirements when someone takes advantage of the flex development code. Is there any affordable housing requirement? Whether it is, if they take advantage of the flex code, is it additional fee? Is it unit creation? Is it unit creation in another location?
Open space. Open space is a big one. In flex.
Right, but in addition to the open space.
I can send her the use chart, Judy and Jen. I can send them the use chart that shows them the breakout of what residential uses are permitted in the more industrialized zones. And I can send her the flex development, kind of the provisions that are associated with flex development.
And that would be great. I think we have the current zoning because we frankly pulled it apart as well. We had some other thoughts in addition to things that have come up here. But, it might be a good idea if you send them just to make sure we have the most current version.
Yeah. I mean, I think also the problem is at least with the town overlay district is I'm not sure how much space there is left for housing units. I mean, I think that by default, we are getting pushed out into the country overlay district. I mean, prices of property in the country overlay or the town overlay district, for one, are prohibitive. But for two, there's just not much space left. But then you run into the water sewer issues of the country overlay district. So, I mean, I think this all kind of feeds into our finite little island and property puzzle.
So where there is unrealized potential, I think it in the town overlay district is for infill. And I think that's something that should not be discounted.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Penny, what did you say?
I said where there is potential for more development in the town overlay district is for infill development.
I agree. I just think the problem with that, I think cost per unit gets bigger with infill, and I could be wrong. I mean, that's just
It's not something that's going to address the problem on a large scale basis, for sure.
Brooke, what were you going to say?
I just have some questions really about when we talk about letting ADUs be larger. I'm wondering what the context of that is. Is there more background?
Accessory dwelling units. So yeah.
So like allowing secondaries to be larger relative to the primary, or allowing tertiaries to be larger if it's affordable would be, I mean, kind of both might be interesting to think about.
There's a restriction to the size of an accessory dwelling unit inside a house, not a separate secondary dwelling or anything like that. But, and I don't know the exact numbers, but
I do. It's 550 gross floor area,
which is tiny. I mean, which is tiny.
Right. So I have a garage apartment that's about 425 square feet. If I it's over the garage. If I incorporated the garage in it to make it a little larger, would that then?
Oh no, we're
not
getting into the
compliant?
garage apartments. Don't say it.
Uh-oh.
No, it's just we've been having definition issues. So is
Okay.
that garage fully attached? Is it separated by a breezeway? I think, and I would have to, you'd have to talk to someone who I'd have to relook at the new definitions, but there's some differences there.
So, but regardless, if I were willing to do something, I mean, to be honest with you, the likelihood that homeowners are going to put deed restrictions for SHI listed
I know,
on their properties is about slim to none.
that's
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
I think one other thing that I would think of is there a way, they're not shy qualified, but is there a way to encourage dormitory construction for seasonal employees in hopes of freeing up freestanding properties that are taken out of the marketplace
Mhm.
seasonally?
Mhm. Has there been much clamoring for that from your employers? How much
The-
demand do you get for that?
Employers are purchasing duplexes and half duplexes left and right.
Yep.
You know, I think the dormitory construction, we've seen one recently that was very, very successful from my perspective at the
Yep.
Yacht Club downtown.
Uh-huh.
It was an attractively built building. It houses a significant number of bedrooms. It was right in the town core district. It was constructed. But there are a lot of businesses that are taking out existing units for employee housing that they would
Right.
get a better bang for their buck if the dormitory code allowed them to have more flexibility potentially.
Okay,
Or more land available in the dormitory zones.
okay.
There's also the community sailing dorm, which is very good, which is in the
Yeah.
My Pod, which is another area you might want to focus on, the Mid-Island district where all kinds of housing is being encouraged. So,
And the Boys and Girls Clubs recently have done a lot of employee housing. My opinion is the issue with some of these types of structures is they're vacant for 10 months or 9 months of the year.
Right.
Well, the other thing with dormitory, it's not shy eligible.
Right. It's more of an effort of creating other unit opportunities, and then could the trust buy them and make them shy eligible, or taking
And
off
take-
some of the pressure and creating
Right.
units that became year round.
And I would say that the nonprofit universe is doing a much better job of this than the for-profit universe.
Mhm.
They're more nimble somehow. I wanted to follow up to Brooke's question about the accessory dwelling units.
Mhm.
When zoning started here in 1972, well, Eleanor, you would know more than I, but it's always been a very, very, I think, valued element of zoning not to have two houses of the same size on a lot, a primary and secondary,
Mhm.
and to have that scalar separation. And I wasn't sure, did you mean make just every house bigger or have the opportunity to equalize them, or what was meant by that, ADUs being larger?
I think that I'm pretty sure this came up in our discussion with Andrew, and I think that it was just the idea that the existing size limit on the ADU is really small, and perhaps it could be expanded. I think it was just that.
But it's relative to the primary.
I understand. I understand.
I think what they're referring to there is the accessory dwelling units inside of the primary dwelling. I don't think they're not talking about secondary dwellings. They're
Mhm.
talking about apartments in houses.
yeah, the
Mhm.
secondary dwelling has to have a dimensional size difference. 80-20 can actually be either between primary and secondary. Tertiary can be no larger than a certain size. I think it's, what is it, 7?
It's 6.
7,
Is it up
650?
to 7? I thought it was 6.
Hold on, I'll tell you, I'm looking at the thing. An accessory is 550 gross floor area. Tertiary is, give me a second, is
650.
where is this? 650 gross floor area.
Yeah.
Attached or detached, you know, there's different ways you can do it, but yeah. So.
Okay. Anything else occur to you on this one? Because if not, we can go on to another one.
Well, I
Okay.
want to talk about just some sort of property tax incentives, or maybe this isn't the place to do that.
Not
What
with
about-
it, not with these. We
Okay,
can
never
get to
mind.
that, but no, it's all right, Penny. We can talk about it. It just doesn't neatly fit into any of these particular boxes. But even in the last plan, we had other things we talked about besides the sort of DHCD official list. So we can certainly talk about that.
Let's wait until there's a better place to talk about it.
That's okay. That's fine. Tyler, why don't you scroll down to 3? Just because the site question we'll get to with the map. So one of the things DHCD wants to hear about from the community is what characteristics of proposed development do you prefer? Do you want to focus on infill, or do you want to encourage rather infill or cluster or adaptive reuse of existing structures? You know, mixed use, inclusionary zoning. What kind of do you want to see? Let's say you've got a project coming, but what do you want it to be? I mean, ideally, what would you want to see?
I think here on Nantucket, all these things need to be in play because it's what fits into that specific site. I think that to hamstring us by saying this is one thing we're looking for, we have so many things going on the island and so many kind of different flavors for each neighborhood. I think that we really need to look at have all of these tools in our bag to do appropriate developments in the appropriate place.
I would say I hear a lot about inclusionary zoning from the community as the answer for affordable housing, and you know, I worry. I mean, my response to that is yes, but it doesn't fix the backlog because it requires more development to create a small percentage of affordable units within the new development. So going forward, as a way of keeping up if we ever catch up, I think it's a really good thing to do, and I think we need to talk about it more. But it is not the solution, as some people want to believe.
Right. Well, it never is the solution anywhere. Even in Brookline and Newton, where they've had it forever, it's a help, but it's certainly not the solution.
Yeah. I think with only 4.8% of Nantucket left for development, this was one we should have put in at 20% available left. Not that it shouldn't go in today.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that? Does anybody else have anything to add to this, by the way? Because if not, I'd like to just jump down to this 5th one and get any thoughts you might have about that, so we can then get to the site question. Yes, of course.
So yeah, just talk for a minute about how it works in, I think you said Brookline or the other example you gave. Like, I just think for the public, it would be useful to talk about it a little bit.
Okay, well, Brookline has water and sewer townwide. Newton has water and sewer townwide. The demand for places to live year round is a very different market from what you have on Nantucket. So, and those towns, well, Newton is not the case anymore, but both of those towns a couple of years ago were not at 10%, which is often a shock to people to learn, but it was the truth. So developers were using 40B to develop more housing. And there's a lot of redevelopment that happens in those towns because the demand for housing is so high and the infrastructure is there to support it. So, you know, in addition to 40B, when there has been development under their own zoning, at least in the districts where there was like more activity allowed, more development allowed, they would get affordable units. Did they get tons? Not necessarily, but they did. And I mean, Newton and Brookline have some of the oldest inclusionary zoning in Massachusetts, if not in the country. So it's never been the prime source of affordable housing development. But it's on the books, it's generated housing. Brookline, I think, also has done a good job. And, you know, Jen, you may even have an opinion about this because you worked there, but I think Brookline has also done a good job using fees in lieu of units, which is a way for a developer to comply. If they don't want to, for any reason, kind of build the development unit in their project, they can pay a fee to the housing trust. And I think Brookline, Somerville's another town or another place where the housing groups have done a good job with that revenue to create affordable housing. So sometimes IZ doesn't create actual units, but it does create some funding source. If it works at all, it'll create
Okay.
some funding source for the housing trust.
And what are they required to create or contribute?
Well, they're not, it's not the same answer. In fact, every town with a fee in lieu bylaw, it's different. I hate to confuse you, but some places just say, you know, whatever the going market rate is what you're going to pay to, basically the replacement cost of the unit that you didn't build. Some places have a residual land analysis that they do that's very complicated. Cambridge has something like that, but I think it varies by community. I just don't want to, I don't want to give you one answer, but everybody has their own formula. Some communities use a multiplier of the median household income. And the actual things that trigger inclusionary zoning are different in those two communities. And in Somerville and Cambridge, they've recently dropped it extremely low, like anything over, 4 units or something requires an affordable unit. It's getting pretty dire. But that is not the same in, say, Newton. But these are communities where there's a lot of redevelopment of existing assets happening. And that's really how the affordable units are getting created, whether it's through 40B or the existing zoning.
Thank you.
It's a very different market.
Brian?
Go ahead, Dave.
I guess it's what would our tipping point be? Like, where would that kick in? And do we really have any developments or enough development for that to really even create any units? I mean, so what would it kick into a major commercial development? I mean, how many? I've seen 3 of those in the 2 years I've been on planning board. I mean, so what would be the trade-off, and what is our tipping point where inclusionary zoning would kick in? I think
Yeah, and then that's a policy issue. I mean, it's not something in the context of this plan that we can give you a specific answer to.
Yeah,
We can tell you
no.
out some. Well, I mean, we can't. It's just that takes another whole discussion. And frankly, you shouldn't even attempt to do it without talking with your developers because you need their input. But I mean, we happen to think some mention of it belongs in this plan. And I know Andrew doesn't entirely agree with that, but we think it's kind of glaring omission, frankly, in your zoning.
Are there any thoughts or statements about bonus density for affordable units or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's pretty common. I mean, you won't get them otherwise. I mean, you have to give something as a cost offset, or you're not going to get the units. This has been a problem in Somerville, where frankly, some projects have simply stayed under the threshold, however low it may have been. It's lower now, but it used to be 7 units or 8 units. And the developers were just always coming in with 6 or 7 unit developments because they didn't want to hit that threshold. So that's another kind of issue that comes up with inclusionary zoning is when you try to set the bar too low or have unreasonable expectations as the percentage of affordable units, you'll just keep getting less development. And that has implications too. So, we're not saying this is like the cure-all. We just think it's something that people ought to be talking about. And, certainly in the districts where you have the ability to do more density, it would be a conversation for the island boards to have and staff. Raymond, did you have your hand up?
I did. Can you explain the difference between that flex development thing and cluster?
So I'm not going to I'm not an expert in your flex development. And frankly, I think it's funny that DHCD uses the word cluster because nobody talks that way anymore. in the
I
flex
know,
world,
that's
but-
why I asked.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what they're talking about is this concept of the type of development where you can do sort of more of the development in one part of the site. And in order to have some public benefit, such as, you know, in the traditional world, open space. And over time, cluster developments became, you know, the density bonus provisions they grew. So you might be able to get a density bonus in a cluster development for including affordable housing or including senior units, or, you know, it was like a public benefits menu. You know, I mean, natural resource protection zoning, which is sort of the sequel to cluster, often has those same kinds of provisions. But the idea is that you're allowing a certain amount of development as of right. And if you give us this public benefit, whatever it might be, which could include affordable housing, you can do more.
Right. I think that's attractive to Nantucketers, just to have bits of green space incorporated in, especially if we're doing apartments. You know, I just think that that's something that the community would support, as in 31 Fairgrounds.
I have a question.
Just a moment, Jerome. Penny?
Yeah, just quickly, Andrew Vorsh says that Nantucket is phasing out cluster developments and the flex is replacing it in the town overlay district.
We don't have cluster anymore. It's been removed from the bylaw for quite a while, but the flex took its place. It's in the bylaw.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly plausible answer in this case. I mean, a lot of towns don't have cluster zoning anymore because it's passé, but they have something, they have the sequel to it.
Judy,
Yeah.
Judy, do you mind taking a general public question? Or would you
Sure.
prefer to wait?
What, it's your meeting, Mr. Chairman. What would you like us to do?
Okay, let's just see if we can and grab it real quick. Jerome, did you want to go ahead and ask that question?
Okay, different towns within Commonwealth of Massachusetts have been mentioned other than Nantucket. And my question is, has any consideration been taken to the fact that Nantucket, the town of Nantucket, is an island, whereas Somerville, Newton, Brookline are all an expanse of the space that's on the mainland? How is the fact that Nantucket is an island and it's so fragile and clustered is going to be affected by all this development?
So we are well aware that you're an island because we've worked there before. I think that the answer nonetheless is we've been asked to help the island prepare an updated housing production plan, which has certain requirements. And we're trying to figure out with the trust and with staff how best to address these requirements so that the town has a housing production plan that they may be able to rely on as a planning tool, as a managing comprehensive permits tool. That's what our job is. And we're not here to change 40B because we don't have that authority. And frankly, neither does the town of Nantucket. So.
Jerome, thank you for the question. I think we'll hold maybe for the end for kind of generalized questions as we're working through line by line on the draft. Thanks, Judy.
So I think thank you. So why don't we just go to this last one so we can then get to the map? Because I think the map is fun and it's interesting and we need your input on that. But this regional collaborations, what are you folks doing now at all, if anything, in terms of working with other jurisdictions on housing policy or sharing knowledge or whatever? What are your relationships off island with other entities?
So we'll come to Brooke and then we'll have Tucker give you kind of an update on some of the conversations with the vineyard and such. Go ahead, Brooke.
Okay.
So we had a visit from the CDP, Cape Development Partnership, pre-COVID. They came over and toured Nantucket. So we are in communication with them. We do meet up at conferences when they start happening. And then the other thing we're doing is the coalition version of the transfer fee legislation for housing in Boston, which Tucker can elaborate on a little bit more.
Yep.
And Brooke, while just I'm thinking about it, the housing advocacy groups on Nantucket have regular meetings, so it's not just our board working. There are multiple
Oh, that's a good point.
local housing that, to Jerome's point, as an island, we don't relate that well to the mainland, but there are a number of local organizations.
Yeah, Housing Stakeholders Group is what we call one of them.
Super. I mean, I think this gives us something to work with. I don't think anybody in Boston, Penny, I'm not cutting you off. I'll get you in just a second. I don't think anybody in Boston expects you to change your geography just to answer this question, but we need to have something to say that's plausible. Penny, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just quickly, are we doing anything with the Housing Assistance Corporation right now? I guess not.
Not, I mean, not beyond there being a part of, I mean, probably the main off-island thing would be our involvement with the Housing Transfer Fee Coalition, to get, you know, I mean, that's looking for statewide enabling legislation in the vein of our housing bank bill, a transfer fee in support of housing, much in the same way the land bank fee is in support of conservation of land.
Could we
So
add to the,
HAC is a part of some of those discussions.
And Penny, Tucker, help me with his name, but the gentleman at HAC has been readily available for questions. We just don't have a project ready to kind of bring to them to work through.
I don't know which gentleman you're referring to, but I mean, HAC is, you know, is there. They were part of, obviously, the Sachem's Path project, but I think you may be thinking of, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but of Philippe Jordy at the Island Housing Trust is someone we have a lot of interaction with.
No, there's somebody else, and his name will come to me in a minute, but.
Kevin McGuire.
Yes,
Right.
thank you, Kevin McGuire.
Yeah, Kevin is not at HAC.
Right.
He's his own entity, but
Forgive me.
yeah.
They brought him in as a consultant, didn't they,
Yeah.
Tucker?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Could we add to this list that we are continue to work closely with our legislators on
Absolutely.
any initiatives that require state attention?
Sure. Tyler or Jen or Barry, are we forgetting anything on these points before we shift to the site-specific discussion?
One thing that we've talked about, Judy, getting the trust's opinion on is to what extent should we incorporate ideas from the 2016 plan, right? Like if they haven't happened in the past 5 years, should we, forget them or, sort of go back and pick out the best ones and double down? Because, going back through that 2016 plan, there's some, pretty good ideas in here. It's like, oh, I should propose them. But, got to keep in the back of your mind, they were proposed in a very similar process back then. So it'd be good to get your take on how we should handle those.
Yeah, we just went through this with East Hampton, where their housing trust, their housing partnership kind of went through the previous plan, which was done by the regional planning agency, and just kind of literally went through the old recommendations that they hadn't gotten to yet and said, yeah, we should keep this, or no, this needs to go. So that is actually a good point, Tyler. And I think when you guys are while you're reviewing the draft needs assessment, if you could take a look at the implementation section of the last plan, or we can even just pull it out and send it to you as a PDF. So it's easy, you've got it in your hands. And maybe you can just give us some thoughts on what of any of those former recommendations that haven't been addressed yet should stay. And we will keep those and we'll let go of others. So we can do that kind of after this meeting. That's a good point.
It's Ken. Can I just add one point? While this is not specific with respect to the actual language, one of the things that we've been doing as a community is, in fact, we've been studying sort of what places like Aspen have been doing relative to address their problems. And so it provides guidance for communities that have similar problems. They've got a little bit greater flexibility but it's giving us a sense of understanding how they're addressing it and seeing what might be able to be fit into our community here.
Yeah, and we were actually going to put a couple of case study type examples in this plan because Catherine Dennison, who's not on this call, actually did a fair amount of research on that very question. You know, what are these other places doing that, you know, may or may not be an island, but certainly have very similar kind of, you know, just intense, relentless seasonal housing demand that sort of drives everything. So we'll include a couple of kind of case study sheets on those in the plan.
Yeah, and if I could interject, Judy, I
Yeah.
can't see if anyone else is trying to speak.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, just the other thing that and this is definitely the third rail issue, but I feel like it's my job to bring it up because in the focus groups, we heard about short-term rental regulations over and over. I know it's a current topic and you're considering, but I just wanted to throw that out and just get your range of thoughts.
Yeah, it's a good point. Everybody seemed to have an opinion.
Maybe before we dive into that, because that could be a lengthy discussion, but just, I don't know, Judy, if item 5 there in terms of, you know, whether it really falls under collaboration, but, you know, I think we want to note in here, we are a housing choice community.
Oh, good point. Yes. Yeah.
And we also received a $1.5 million grant from MassWorks in support of the 6 fairgrounds infrastructure this year.
Yep. Thank you. Good point. I guess there's one other thing I want to just mention, and then Jen, we'll go to the map, but I don't know how much there's been discussion on Nantucket about the housing choice bill and the changes that it introduces for, you know, the different requirements for special permits in support of housing development or the reduced threshold that town meeting would need to achieve in order to make some zoning changes. But it's something I think you're going to want to talk about, and we'll allude to it in some manner in this document because we really need to. But I hope it's on everybody's radar screen on Nantucket.
Yeah, Judy, of particular interest to me is what qualifies for the lower threshold for the vote at town meeting. I think that's a really good, maybe a little bit about that in here would be helpful.
Yeah, and we'll do our best, but I'll tell you, I've been on 3 different webinars now with state officials and town councils and others. The guidance from DHCD is extremely general. And there are a lot of questions municipal councils are bringing up who may be unduly muddying the waters, but they are bringing up a lot of questions that are hard to answer based on the plain language of the law. But we can certainly give you at least the general version of what they are saying. And I think you're going to see more guidance roll out. I think the most important thing, the most significant thing I've heard from DHCD in all of this is be sure to ask your local council. And if you're going to rely on the new housing choice legislation to support going to town meeting for a simple majority vote, be prepared to provide the Attorney General's office with an analysis of why you think the new law applies. So in other words, the burden is on towns to sort this out. But we've been through that before, and we're there again. But we certainly have to say something about it in this plan. I mean, it would be crazy not to. Jen, do you want to have us stop this screen share and now bring up Barry's map?
Yeah, I think that would be good. And I would love to get people's opinion on short-term rentals, but
Yeah,
I think that we could, if we are going to have another meeting either next week or we have a little time now, but we could push that if you think it is going to be lengthy, because I think it could be potentially. We can go right into the sites and strategies and talk about short-term rental regs at a later date. If that, Brian, does that make sense to do? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Barry, I think you can share your screen again, right?
I wasn't trying to cut that off. I just thought
That's okay.
Woo-hoo.
It was
Here we
mentioned a
go.
lot, as I'm sure you can,
I do. I understand, Jen.
sure
I
you're
get
not
it.
surprised.
Right.
So, Barry's going to really go through this, but just so you know where this came from, we did attempt to mine for site ideas through the focus groups, and we didn't get a lot of ideas. We got a few, but really these came more from our couple rounds of talking with staff, and we just have a bunch of ideas, and really these are a combination of things. There, where could the town encourage 40B comprehensive permits? And then some sites would be able to be developed under your existing zoning. And so we have kind of a combination of both ideas here. And what we'd love to know from you is, number one, did we catch all the sites in the next 5 years that you're sort of thinking should be in this plan for either encouraging 40B development or encouraging development through your local zoning? And most of these are private sites, so and that's typical. We look for municipally owned sites. There are some as well, but it's sort of a combination of those. And the idea here is you don't have control over many of these. Certainly the private sites you don't have control over, but there are things that the community can do to encourage the kind of housing that it wants to see. Can I zoom in? Oh, can the map zoom in a bit?
I can zoom in.
I think Barry can. So that's sort of, I'll pop in if there's more questions around that, but I know we're all kind of anxious to see where these sites are. So we also just want to make sure that we've captured, 5 years is not that a long time, but at the same time, I think these sites end up carrying over into future plans. So they could be sort of on the list because you don't know when opportunities will come up. You could say you have some sites on there where the market, the listing price is crazy, astronomical. We're not going to be able to go for this right this moment, but maybe a few years down the road, maybe, we don't know what will happen to those sites. So that's sort of the thinking around put more on rather than less, because you don't know where the opportunities will really present themselves. Okay, Barry, with that long intro, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So this is a PDF version of the map, but I can also zoom in on my other app that can provide more detail if there's any sites you'd like to zoom in on more. But I'll just kind of run down the list and feel free to stop me at any point if you want to discuss any in more detail. So the first one is 18 Vesper Lane, the former condo owned by UMass. Second one is 51 Sparks Ave, which Stop and Shop currently has a lease on the property, but it seemed to be a vacant site. The next one is Housing Trust property at 135 to 137 Orange Street. And then the old fire station at 135 Pleasant. Cement plant property at 57 Surfside Road, 31 Fairgrounds Road, 2 to 16 Tacoma Way, which are town owned, and it's a series of parcels that could have potential for duplexes. Norquarta Drive is where the existing housing authority property is, but there could be opportunities to use that vacant area a little more efficiently, maybe fill in some other units there. Moore's End Farm, we talked about just maybe potentially having some housing for agricultural workers or trying to fill in some of those empty spots there. Same thing with Bartlett Farm. And then there's a piece of the Glowacki property at 13 Woodland Drive, another town-owned property at 47 Okorwa. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that right. And Nantucket Inn is the last site.
Nantucket Inn property should come off the list.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would rather see like 10 Rugged Road versus the Nantucket Inn if it's wish list stuff.
Okay.
I think that there's a restriction on Moore's End, a land council restriction, and a significant portion of Bartlett.
We were looking.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we were looking at that a little bit with Andrew, and it looks like there's a restriction on us, the field and the open space portion, but maybe there's some opportunity for housing within the more developed area where there's greenhouses and other buildings. It was the thought. Yeah.
Okay.
This came up in the context of what can we be talking about that's in the country overlay?
Penny,
Yeah, I think it would be useful to get a list of town-owned properties that are undeveloped. I mean, one that comes to mind is West Dover Street. There's a rather large piece in town between number 9 and 11. So call it 9.5 or 11.5. That just comes to mind. I know there are others that are town-owned that haven't been committed to anything. Would that not be helpful to try and get that list?
I can certainly pull that list of properties, yeah.
Another space that I come back to, and I apologize that I don't fully grasp and understand the process in it, but is properties that the town owns that are connected to the airport near the intersections of Nobodere Farm Road and Milestone Road. It's a very complicated scenario with the FAA, and it's over my head. But
Right. Yeah.
It feels like it's a site that could lend itself to housing.
Holly, those are controlled by the FAA, and it's something that I've been exploring on behalf of the town, and it is beyond complicated.
I've heard this in other towns with airports. Yeah.
So I think it's important to note that the town is in the process of a master facilities planning process. And so they are like midstream in evaluating what they have and what they need. So outside of the old fire station property, I don't know that there's any appetite to offer up any town-owned land at this point until that process is completed.
And we probably should acknowledge that because Brooke, one of the criteria, which we're back on that sheet we had up before, was identifying municipally owned properties that the town would make available for RFP. And I think Barry and Jen, Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the thought was that the old fire station site perhaps might satisfy that criterion. We don't need a long list of town-owned land. We just need to have a few examples. And I think that was one.
And the other one, there was one near the airport. It has a lifeguard housing on it now. So there were those two. And then I guess, does the trust own, I'm forgetting the road. Can you scroll up so I can see the list, Barry?
Was it?
The Tacoma Way. Oh, town owned, it says.
Yeah.
And then the Tacoma Way were other town owned, the smaller lots that had already been created. So I think that we're okay with town-owned property in terms of the requirement. And I think that's fair to say that you have a study going on right now to look at, your town facilities.
The trust owns a property at 7 Amelia Drive that's not listed, that has capacity for 4 units.
Okay.
And
Thank
then
you.
Wheat Drive is perpendicular to Tacoma, but it's not listed, and it is an identified street. That's owned by the town, not by the trust.
Okay.
What did you say it is? Lake Drive?
Wheat, W-A-I-T-T.
Okay.
I think, yeah, a couple of things. So I think it's somewhere in here, we need to note that the old fire station opportunity to develop is somewhat contingent on like the master facilities plan for the town.
Sure.
It's going to house departments in the interim.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing for the town manager to see in there.
Sure.
The second thing is, and I guess I'm speaking personally, but I would far rather see Waite Drive, the lots that Brian was just describing, as like priority development versus the Tacoma Way lots itself, or themselves. They provide kind of a nice barrier with regard to the Six Fairgrounds project. And I think we need to be conscious of asking one location to do too much lifting.
Those lots also provide an opportunity for housing Nantucket and also for habitat, which are really important in terms of home ownership as opposed to rental property.
Do we want to make note of the ownership of the UMass property?
UMass is listed.
It's at the top, but in concert with that, should we not? Or maybe it's irrelevant to include the existing units that are part of that transaction?
Right, it's sort of in flux, I guess is the question. So the other ones say housing trust property,
Yep.
you know, indicates the ownership, whereas that one doesn't. That's what I was pointing out.
Okay.
I mean, technically,
Yeah, we're not there yet.
we're not there yet. But stay tuned, I guess I would say.
The other thing I would mention on the map is that as we move forward and refine it a little bit, we can also use different colors to indicate the types of strategies that you're thinking about for each of these sites, maybe
Right.
grouping them together in a few different strategies.
Right. That would be great.
Yeah, just a question in that regard with number 6, 31 Fairgrounds Road redevelopment, single family home. Is that meant to indicate what it is or what it's going to be?
What it is now.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, if you have any other suggestions, you know, I've been taking notes, so we'll make sure to make the changes you just mentioned. But I think if we can, you know, make those changes and then maybe revisit at our next meeting, I want to make sure that whatever we're presenting at the webinar, makes sense to present to get community feedback on. And what we'd like to understand more, we understand a little bit from talking with staff, but maybe next time we can talk more about what kind of development could you envision on each of these properties that end up on the list. Like, you know, we'll take some of the ones you mentioned off, like Nantucket Inn, and add some others on. But we'd love to just think more about, like, what kind of a vision do you have for development there?
Which
And
gets to the
that's
other
really it, I
criteria.
think. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, interrupting
Yeah.
you, but it gets to that other criterion of, well, what do you want to see? So I
Right.
agree with you. I mean, there's still this, now we have to sort of connect this to what is it? I agree with you.
Jen, it's Ken's question. If the ordering is a sense of an order of priority, I would like to have us move the Bartlett Farm and the Moores End Farm down to the bottom of the list, because in terms of the public's perception of the reality of doing these things, I want to be able to have a comfort level that says that we have a realistic chance of being able to use those properties for doing something. So
Yeah.
Again, if
Yeah,
it's
and-
an order of prioritization, that I think that's important.
Okay, yeah, and this is not ordered by priority. It was kind of ordered north to south, but then I think we added a few and changed a few, so it's not strictly that at this point. But I think that if we can group these by colors, you know, there may be, you know, like, I don't know, you mentioned the Tacoma Way may be appropriate for like Habitat or Housing Nantucket, like a small kind of duplex kind of thing. That could be a different color than, you know,
Right.
You know, like reusing the old fire station, which could, you know, potentially, or that property, which could potentially be a bigger development. And so we might, and that might be, you know, it could be either through your existing zoning or it could be as a 40B. So we could sort of group these, not so much by number, but in the way we present them, by types of housing even, or even like what's a trust project versus what's a private, you know, a private project that the town's simply encouraging rather than doing themselves. So there's lots of ways to kind of group these. And I think that in terms of priority, some of that will be dependent on the category it's in. So if we're talking about something that's a private 40B development, you don't have a lot of control over that anyway. But if it's something that it's a trust initiative, you do have an order of priority that you already have identified. You know, your work plan going forward. So I think that we need to think through, how are we presenting this? What are we saying are the visions and if there are regulatory mechanisms involved, or if it's municipal or trust initiatives? And then talk about that next time around. What's a way that we could group these, and what are the visions for that? Does that make sense, Ken, in
Yeah.
terms of?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it does.
okay.
But in that regard, I want to really reinforce what Tucker said earlier. With respect to the old fire station property, it should be noted in our description of it, subject to existing town planning.
Yeah,
Because,
okay.
Absolutely.
because
Fair.
the town has real issue with respect to office space, is going to be using this for a 5 to 10-year time frame. And so I think it's important for the town manager to see that we're recognizing the fact that it isn't something that is available in the current environment.
Yeah, we hear that. We hear that. That's fine.
Yeah, and I think you were saying this, Jen, but like, just think in the description, maybe, rather than simply Moors End Farm, but the type of housing that might go there is going to allay a lot of concern initially.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tucker. And in the way, there's a lot of clarity, I think, that we can provide in the way we organize the presentation and what we're saying,
Well, and why we're saying it.
and why we're saying it. Yeah.
Right, but I think it should, I just, sorry to stick on this, but I think like people will pick up this independent sheet. And I think the sheet needs to be able to speak for itself.
I see what you're saying.
Outside of the
Yeah.
presentation.
Sure.
Yeah, so maybe our descriptions here, we should separate into, one should just be ownership, current ownership, and then another column should probably be potential future vision or something like that, that kind of describes a little bit more, because right now it's a little mixed. It was just our shorthand to remind us what we talked about.
Right.
But I think that's a good point, because this will be grabbed onto and handed around.
And once I've pulled out the specific parcels for each site, I can add the acreage on there for reference as well.
That's great. Thank you. Brooke, were you going to say something?
Yeah, something occurred to me, and I don't know whether it goes here under the zoning piece, but there was a proposal by an individual homeowner for a bonus covenant lot on a large lot in Tom Nevers at town meeting. And so there's been talk about expanding the covenant program in that way, like allowing extra covenant lots for subdivision so anyway, I don't remember the details of it, but they were sort of sent back to the drawing board and sent back to the neighborhood to talk about it and come up with an alternative. So that should be on here somewhere.
Yeah, the Tom Nevers Association wasn't very pleased with it. It was Stephen Cohen's client in 2018 or 2019.
So should we put this property on the map, do you think?
I'm not sure it's a property as much as it is a zoning strategy, which would be some expansion of the covenant program. I'm skipping back to that.
Yeah, okay, fair.
Penny has a question.
Yeah, it's a comment. I really think I'm not comfortable having people's private property on this list unless somebody's alerted them that Moors End Farm and Bartlett Farm. I don't want the owners of that property to see this way. Somebody needs to talk to them if we're going to include them on this list.
Yeah, and a lot of communities, they do sort of send members of the committee out who have relationships with, different owners already, to just give them a heads up that, we're looking at potential zoning changes or, however you want to characterize it for the particular property, to give them a heads up. I think that's a good idea. Rima and then David.
A question on the Amelia Drive property. Does that have a commercial requirement? I heard something about first floor needs to be commercial or office space. Is that true? And or would that be a mixed use, situation?
Now, the first floor commercial use was a statement that was made at one of our previous meetings. I believe that it was related to the HOA of Amelia Drive versus the commercial zoning aspect of the property.
Well, an HOA, is in play too, so,
Yep.
all right.
No,
And-
but there are definitely, Rima, to answer your question, it's in commercial neighborhood, that district now. It was shifted from RC or RC2. There are some requirements as to the mixed use and the allocation of where a dwelling is and so forth. So that's, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are some sort of provisions that restrict how you can develop a lot. But you can have residential for sure.
Right. So I just think maybe that should be listed as possible mixed use, and the fire station as possible mixed use as well. I mean, maybe the town would be amenable to doing offices and residential on that property.
So are you done, Rima? You good? Okay. I mean, I just wanted to say about the last discussion about covenant lots. I think that would be plugged into the zoning portion of this discussion. I think I don't think it's identifiable by one particular property. I mean, I think West Tom Nevers is what we're talking about here, but I think there's a lot of bigger lots spread over the island in Lug 2 or 3 that would apply to. And I think that's part of more of a zoning approach than an individual property approach. Just my thought. Thanks.
So Judy, I think this is probably enough for now with the sites. If
I
you
agree.
have some other stuff that you want to close out with.
Not at this time. No, I think we're fine. This is actually really helpful. And I suspect if we started trying to talk about short-term rentals, we'd be here for another 2 hours. So, but I wasn't trying to shut that conversation off. But I think in terms of material that we all need to move forward with planning the webinar, or certainly for us to be drafting other sections of this plan that we haven't written yet, this is helpful.
Yeah, and I think it would be great if you can get a quorum for maybe next week, if there's I don't know if this time next Tuesday is good, but that would be great to continue this and to really plan for the content of the webinar more. We have a little time now, so if next week doesn't work, I think we could potentially push it to the following week if that's better for you. And then I also just wanted to make sure that you have everything you need to just continue doing outreach. We'll update the date on the webinar, but I think Barry provided the webinar link already, if I'm not mistaken. And so it'll be the same link, and we'll just update the date and the time on that, and then you can start to push that out as well.
Perfect. And we are scheduled for a meeting next week at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're already scheduled. Okay, that's great. So would that be okay for us to monopolize a good portion of your agenda? I don't know what else you have going on that day.
We do have some other stuff, but we had planned that you all would be back for a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So Jen, after you and I talked, I was looking at my calendar again, and they are in my calendar for next week. So I thought we must have already talked about this, and I totally forgot.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
So I might suggest that if we have time now, that we use it so that
Okay.
we don't consume as much of that meeting, which we have some business that we have to conduct at. So.
Okay.
Do you mind if we go over in this forum so I can have it in the minutes, the matter of the rescheduling of the
Yes. So Tucker, while we're on a recorded meeting, I think there was some discussion that we are going to move the webinar date. If that's
correct.
agreeable to the board members, the new proposed date was the 30th
Yep. So
at
there's
4:30 p.m.
That's correct. A conflict came up with the FinCom housing article discussion, which got carried over from yesterday to the exact same time and date we had planned for the webinar for the housing production plan. So fortunately, the consultants are able to accommodate making a change to April 30th at 4:30, and that will be the new
March.
webinar time. I'm sorry,
March.
March 30th, at 4:30. So
And this
yeah,
will cancel the previously scheduled webinar that was at what time? And
4
date?
o'clock on the 23rd.
Yes, Penny?
Yeah, can we make a commitment to get our comments on the HPP progress draft back by next week?
Like by the end of next week, you mean? I don't know how
Yes.
busy people are, so I'm trying not to be unrealistic, but Penny, to your point, it would certainly be helpful to us if you guys could get us any comments back by like the 19th. That would be the end of next week. And I would say in terms of public comments, what we're going to do is ask you guys or Tucker or someone to look at them. If you get comments from outside the committee, I don't want to take responsibility for deciding which of those we should address. So I would say if you get comments from others, you guys should take a look at them and give us some direction about what you want us to include and what we shouldn't. And that way you'll own that, that decision, and we'll do what you ask us to do.
So typically, I mean, Jen and Judy, in other, like I noticed on the surveys, there were 600 written comments in the English version. So like typically, what would you include from feedback like that?
Well, in the polished looking version of the plan, we might include some of those comments in text boxes or something as a way to kind of perhaps reinforce some information that's coming through in the data, or observations maybe that we had that turns out a bunch of other people in Nantucket had too. But I mean, we would try to incorporate some of them. We obviously can't incorporate them all, but it does get to be a little bit selective, I admit. But we don't want to silence those voices. We'll use what we can.
And this may go without saying, but technically, since we submitted everything to you, they're part of the public record. If,
Right.
If the public wants to view all the comments, they have everything there.
Right.
Right. But I was wondering if you did, as Judy was describing, include a few that are pulled into the actual document and the rest are an appendix or something. I don't.
Well, it could get kind of a long appendix, I think. I don't know. I'd have to look at that again. I mean, the summaries are there, and I think they're good. And I think for the purposes of this document, that's fine. I think you should let us know what you want us to do. But we do try to incorporate some of them in the document. I just wouldn't do it at this point because, as I said, we know this document's going to change. The more you put things like text boxes in a Word file, and then you start editing it, they kind of migrate all over the place. And I just don't have any patience for it. So I didn't do that yet.
Penny, go ahead. Sorry, Brian had to leave. I forgot I was chair for a second.
No, that's okay. I'm wondering if anybody can share with us when we anticipate the census results from last year.
Ooh. The first file that will come out, as always, is the apportionment file. So long before what's called summary file 1 is released, which has the housing counts that I know you guys are all interested in, the very first release is the apportionment file. It's the age breakdown, 18 or over, under by race at the block level, because that's what's used to define congressional districts. So that will come out first. I don't have, Jen and Barry, you might have, but I have not heard a definitive date yet on summary file 1. And that's what's going to affect your denominator.
Thank you. I'd like to just reiterate something that Penny said earlier, you guys, about private properties in this report. If you could please clarify for me what your thoughts were on particularly the farm properties, because I think that has the potential to be very controversial if it's not contextualized here right now.
Yeah, I think it was, relatively vague at this point, but it was an idea that came out of talking with staff when, Judy was really pushing on, is there anywhere other than Mid-Island, that we can identify? And one thing that was thought of was, well, what about these farm properties? Could they be, somehow encouraged? And I don't, we'd have to look at, is it through zoning? Is it some other, way? I'm not sure exactly what yet, but to encourage or allow more farm worker housing to be integrated into the site to help support the working of the farm. And I don't have any information about how they're housing their workers now, or what is exactly even on the farms. I know that when we looked at the satellite image, it looked like there are a number of buildings. I'm sure some are greenhouses and other farm buildings, but I don't know to what extent they have any housing already. So we haven't really found out yet if this is even a worthwhile idea. So I don't know if there is anyone who could speak with the owners of the farms that could sort of give us a little more information, but also use it as a way to kind of alert them that their properties are kind of being talked about in this context. But that would be helpful to get more information.
Okay, so Allison?
Yeah, I don't have connections to those farms, but I would personally feel more comfortable. This is a very small island. People know everything about everybody and who owns what. And my dad lives on one of those streets that for some reason is just in there as a potential. I would feel much more comfortable if we're talking about potentials that literally are potentials, that maybe we don't use specific addresses and we just more say around the area and it's the acreage. I mean, I don't know if that's even relevant to what we're talking about here. But I would be very uncomfortable if something that I owned was being talked about without my knowledge.
So the only thing I want to just mention to you is that one of the requirements is that your plan identify specific sites where you will encourage the filing of comprehensive permits. So if you want to answer that one as a town-owned site, which then essentially becomes the answer to the next criterion, which is identify municipal properties that you make available through RFP, I mean, that's always an option. But we're hearing you say we probably should be careful what we say about any town-owned property until we have a sense of, what's going to come out of the facility study. So it is really common in these plans to identify specific sites. I mean, towns do this. They do it in their open space plans. They do it in their housing plans. And you're asked to do that. So I think, like Jen said, typically people on the committee might sort of talk to folks whose properties are listed to at least let them know that that we're all having a conversation about this.
So Tucker and then Penny. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think that, Judy and Jen had a conversation with Andrew last week when I was away, and then we had a short conversation yesterday when I was back. And so I think this was something that came up in the initial conversation as Judy and Jen were relaying that. I mean, one of the things that the plan and Dhcd need to take into account, and I may not be using the right term, but it's like the concentration of housing, affordable housing. And so to the extent there are opportunities to spread things out a little bit, that is an area that Dhcd is increasingly looking at. Now, we did talk about Nantucket is a bit of a unique animal, and in some ways, spreading things out is actually inequitable versus equitable. But that's where I think the farm aspect came up. But I 100% agree with what you were saying, Brooke, that before we would go any further with this, I think we would want to have a conversation with both of those entities. I do know both parties, and I'm happy to reach out to them to have a discussion. But we wouldn't want to include those in this without knowing that they had some receptivity.
Yeah, because Penny, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, through you to Judy, why couldn't we just have, or what would the impact be if we had properties that are controlled by the trust and the town only on that list?
That's up to you folks. I would just want to make sure that you have enough to discuss. And I can only reiterate that this is the way this is typically done. It's your plan. I would like to see it be approved as quickly as the last one was. So I think that it's a healthy thing for a community to do, to really think about, well, where would this work? You know, the whole issue about the farms, I mean, I don't know how else to say this, except we do have to think about equity. And, you know, when you look at the map, you know, you can kind of see there is a distinct concentration of these sites in a particular part of the island. Now, I think any of us can make a valid planning case for why that is the case. You know, where's the infrastructure? What's the town's kind of regulatory framework? We all get that, but those are all based on policy decisions that have been made that, from an equity perspective, may constrain one's choices about where they will live. And so that's where this whole thing came from, was like, are there other opportunities outside the town district? When Andrew then, I think, poignantly said, well, those are probably not going to be regulatory strategies as much as they might be something else, you know, whether it's a richly subsidized effort or something, but you know, not necessarily to upset the town's existing and traditional land use framework, but to recognize that equity also matters.
Okay, Ken? Oh, sorry, you done, Judy?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, Ken?
Just 2 points. Sorry to sort of be hammering on this, but this is not a very good time for the Affordable Housing Trust to be grabbing conservation land and taking away farmland and open space for housing. And secondly, it would be more likely that if in fact anything happened with respect to these 2 farm properties, it would be creating housing for the employees of the farm owners, not for the town generally. And so, to my mind, I would just take this off the list. This has an opportunity to kill us based on what's going on in the town right now and some of the issues we're talking about relative to ongoing funding streams.
And that's fine. I think what we would probably ask you to do is think about whether there are other locations in the country part of town where we could talk about doing something. I mean, we don't want to put you in a position where you fail coming out of the box, but we also kind of need you then to be thinking about what opportunities are there outside the town overlay to address affordable housing so that you increase choice. I think that's the question.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Dave?
I think, I mean, Ken, you could not have made a stronger point there, and it needed to be said, and thank you. But I think also, with that said, I think we really need to tread lightly on, I mean, and unfortunately they're the attractive places, but we really need to tread lightly on the Fairgrounds Road corridor. We have continued to really pound away there. And I think, again, as Ken said about the farm property, it hurts us and and just how people view us around town when we keep on packing. And I don't want to say packing, but it has been the low hanging fruit, and it has the infrastructure, but we need to broaden. As Judy said, we need some equity here, and we need to broaden out. So I think also with pulling the farms off that list, and I know Tucker mentioned 10 rugged, I think that should definitely not be on the list. It's there, but I think we really, this document is as much a document that people could use to string us up. So I think we need to be smart about it as far as the community's view on us as a group and where we put our finger on the map for affordable housing. So thanks.
And we all respect that. That's fine. So maybe when we meet next week, you could have put some thought into, well, what are the options outside the town overlay? And how might we play those in this plan? I think that would be fine. We would certainly welcome that input.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, I'm thinking we don't have time for short-term rentals.
But I do agree with Jen, we need to get there and, you know, because it is pervasive. Everybody's
Tucker,
big.
give me a sense of timing, Tucker. What else do we need to do today?
We need, like 5 to 10 minutes tops for the LAU application for 31 Fairgrounds.
Okay, and we anticipated this being how long a meeting? 2 hours?
You tell me.
What is the sense of the board? Do we have a short-term rental conversation in us, or I see Rima shaking her, nope, I'm getting a lot of no's. Okay.
I actually have another meeting anyway.
Okay, all right, well then that's solved. So if is there anything else you need from us before we move on to our next agenda item?
I don't think so. I think this was hugely helpful.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
So
I'm in
we
good,
will,
I think we're in good shape.
so we'll see you next week, same time, same bat channel, different Zoom link.
We actually will probably not log in until about 1:15. I have a standing meeting on the third Tuesday at noon. So if it's 1 hour, so we can join like 1:15, we'll be on.
Great, we'll make note of that. Thank you. Penny, question?
I'm gonna leave for the next item, please.
Okay.
Can somebody text me, Tucker, when it's time to come back?
That's the last thing, Penny, so you don't need to.
What about executive session?
No executive session.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Penny, thank you. Okay, so for the record, Penny Dye has left the meeting, recusing herself on the next agenda item. Tucker, go.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just simply in accordance with our recent involvement with 31 Fairgrounds, the project that Housing Nantucket and Billy Cassidy are doing with regard to year-round housing, 22 units under the flex development, being on that subject. As we all know, a big part of this project, in addition to providing much needed housing for the year-round community, is also to have its inclusion on the SHI list, as well as contribute towards certification. So we are simply looking for the board to approve the submission of an LAU application at the end of this week. We plan to send it in on Friday. And if you would authorize the chair or vice chair to sign on behalf of the trust, that would be terrific.
Okay, any questions on that, or do I hear a motion?
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Vigil.
Yes, based on all that's been transponded about 31 Fairgrounds, just to educate me, is there going to be further review of the actual construction procedures with the HDC?
So,
yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Tucker, go ahead.
Yes, that project will go before the HDC.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vigil. Okay, board, with regard to the LAU, Rima?
I make a motion that either the chair or the vice chair be authorized to execute documents pertaining to the LAU application.
Okay, do I hear a second? Second from Christy? By roll call, Rima?
Aye.
Allison?
Aye.
Christy?
Aye.
And is that everybody at this point?
Me,
Yes.
Dave,
Oh, Dave,
aye.
sorry. Dave,
I'll forgive you.
okay.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Whew. Okay. Is that everything you needed, Tucker?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Great. So next on the agenda is other business, next meeting next week. Again, we repeated same time, 1 p.m. Next Tuesday, March 16th. Is there any questions on that? No. The next item on the agenda is public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda. Anything from the public? Okay, and yep, go ahead.
Well, I just was going to reiterate that well, first of all, Brooke and Rima and Allie did a fantastic job at the FinCom meeting yesterday, and that discussion is continued until March 23rd, as we talked about briefly before, at 4 o'clock. So we will post again for that meeting, and we're hoping that as many of the trust members as possible will be in attendance.
Thanks, Tucker. Okay, any other board comments?
As a public comment, I'd like to make one general comment.
Okay, Mr. Vigil,
Yes.
the public comment portion, we've already closed it.
You said it was, you didn't. You asked for public comment. Just a second ago.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
It's a very simple thing. All these procedures, are they going to be presented at the town board, the town meeting in April?
I'm not sure I understand your question. By procedures?
Everything that's transpired here, does that go for approval to the town meeting?
No, the housing production plan does not require approval at town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, board comments, Christy?
Thank you. I just wanted to let the trust know that the select board's agenda tomorrow night has a space to talk about all the housing articles. So I don't know if I think it's too late to post a meeting, but if you guys can all listen in, we'll be discussing all of the housing articles that the FinCom just reviewed. So just wanted to give you guys that update.
Okay, so we'll have to be careful about a quorum and attendance, right? Since we were unable to post.
You can watch it on YouTube.
Right. Okay, I plan to be there. But just want to say that. Okay.
Go get them, Brooke.
I'll send the YouTube link if you want.
Thanks, Eleanor. You're always on top of these things. Okay, any other board comments? All right, we are not having an executive session that we left room for, so the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Dave move. Second. I heard Christy first. By roll call vote. Dave.
Aye.
Rima.
Aye.
Allie.
Aye.
Christy.
Aye.
And I too vote aye to adjourn. Thanks, everybody. See you.
Thanks, guys.
Next week, if not before.
Welcome home, Tucker.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all.